us who are interested in the furtherance of the best of Dominica will let our ideas contend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pastor Rodney. Thank you. Thank you. I welcome Mr. Stewart Paris to the microphone for allowing the presence of the Holy Spirit among us this morning. Thank you.
Can I kindly invite the audience to stand, please? Can you bow your heads with me and close your eyes as we pray? Almighty, omnipotent, omniscient God, the Creator of the heavens and the earth, our Savior, our Redeemer, and our friend, the only one who rightfully deserves to receive our worship and our adoration. We thank you for your mercies and your loving kindness towards us. In the book of Lamentations, you inform us that we are told that it is because of your mercies why we are not consumed, because your compassion fail not. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. So we thank you this morning for your great faithfulness towards us. We thank you for the opportunity to be able to convene this important national consultation here today. We invite your presence here this morning and in your divine wisdom and judgment. We ask you to kindly direct these proceedings here this morning. Direct them, dear Lord, so that your name can be honored and the people of Dominica can be blessed and that Dominica can be a better place. I commit into your hands this morning those who will take the lead at this event. I pray that the thoughts and utterances of all of us in attendance here today will be aimed at nothing else but to give you glory and for the better good of every Dominican citizen. Once again, we thank you for hearing and answering our prayers in this regard. And we ask for your richest blessings in this symposium today. In Jesus' name.
Yes, and friends, we will move directly into the next item on the agenda, and that will be the presentation by the Chairman, Electoral Commission, Sir Dennis Byron. We have that presentation ready.
And everyone joining this consultation, thank you for accepting my presentation in this format. The Dominica Business Forum has supported the electoral reform process from the beginning of my involvement, and I recognize its contribution to my deliberations with appreciation. Despite the intensity of expression on certain aspects of the report, I have noted considerable consistency in the positive responses to many of the recommendations made in my reports. A constructive approach from those genuinely interested in improving the process could lead to enacting the draft legislation or parts of it and initiating the reform and modernization process. Reform is a continuing incremental process, and waiting for a unanimous agreement on all issues will only stall progress. However, it was conducted independently, impartially, and without fear of it. I trust that even if there are some recommendations to which some stakeholders do not subscribe, that they will acknowledge that they were made in good faith and with the objective of developing the best electoral system for Dominica, one that could potentially set standards for other countries in our region to follow. In addition to the reports, the reform proposals included draft legislation to give effect to the recommendations. And these are the Registration of Electors Bill 2023 and its regulations, the House of Assembly Elections Bill 2023 and its regulations, and the Electoral Commission Bill 2023. The 15 minutes that have been allocated to me are insufficient to allow a full review of my entire proposals. So I have selected 5 critical issues that I can address briefly within the allotted time. And I start with the registered electors. Section 7 of the Registered Electors Bill stipulates that to qualify for registration as a voter, simply put, only those residing in Dominica are eligible for voter registration. Over the years, there has been concern about the bloating of the electoral register. In 2019, for instance, there were 74,895 registered electors, with only 40,762 casting their votes. It was considered possible that this was caused by deceased individuals and other ineligible electors remaining on the register. This led to the objective of introducing measures to cleanse the register of electors. The Registration of Electors Bill proposed solutions, including mandating the Chief Registration Officer to regularly remove individuals who became disqualified. One category for removal were those absent from Dominica for 5 years. This requirement is part of Dominica's currently enforced law. The Chief Registration Officer indicated that he was severely limited in managing objections on this ground due to difficulties in interpreting the provision, as there was no definition of absence, and in accessing evidence of absence. The new draft legislation provided solutions for both of these difficulties. Section 26 prescribed that an individual whose name appears in the register of electors and who lives overseas will not be regarded as being absent from Dominica if within a 5-year period, immediately before the last publication of the register, the individual visited and remained in Dominica for a period of or amounting to at least 90 days. And Section 27 addressed access to evidence by mandating certain officers, including the Commissioner of Police in immigration related functions, to provide relevant information to this Chief Registration Officer at his request. Another significant measure to cleanse the electoral register was a requirement to create a completely new register. All registered voters are required to provide proof of their qualifications to be on the new register for confirmation. A name not confirmed would not feature in the new register, ensuring that the register would only contain qualified electors. The legislative framework for this process is provided in sections 50 to 56 of the bill. Fairness requires avoiding disenfranchising eligible individuals already on the register. The financial implications of confirmation would vary depending on the eligible person's location and the cost of travel to Dominica, and the authorities should mitigate the situation, particularly for those with limited economic means. My report proposed various solutions for equitable arrangements using computer technology that would enable individuals who wished to retain their voting rights to do so without incurring travel expenses to Dominica. But the Act did not prescribe these measures. Section 52 provided the Electoral Commission with the authority to implement suitable measures. Consequently, if the Commission did nothing, everyone would have to travel to Dominica for confirmation. To unequivocally rebut the false commentaries, it should be noted that persons residing overseas do not qualify to be registered as electors, since at the time of registration, they must have been residing in a polling district for a continuous period of at least 3 months. However, if such persons are already registered as electors, they can be confirmed as electors. And if absent for 5 years, they can be removed from the registered electors. I propose an expectation that the Commission will make it unnecessary for registered electors to incur the expense of travel to Dominica to secure confirmation of their status. Regarding national identification cards, as it relates to voters, the majority of respondents to our election survey, which was opened to the general public, showed a preference for a multi-purpose ID card. I believe that a modernized national ID card will align with current trends in identity management. Consequently, I have incorporated provisions in the draft bill for the issuance of national identity cards. However, this will necessitate additional legislation for the proper issue, administration, and distribution of these ID cards. One of the rationales is that individuals not eligible to become registered electors, for instance, due to their age, should also have access to a national ID card. And it is my hope that this regulation will be implemented as swiftly as possible if it is accepted. Now, coming quickly to responding to inaccurate comments regarding election offences, I encourage you to refer to the Phase 2 report on pages 8 to 9, which points out that the existing law of bribery, as defined by the Walsh laws of England, includes the payment or promise of payment to a voter of his travelling expenses on the condition, expressed or implied, that he or she would vote for a particular candidate. Also, Assembly Elections Bill very carefully addresses and stipulates punishments for a wide range of election offences in sections 76 to 90. The offence of bribery is addressed in sections 82 and 85, with penalties up to $5,000 or imprisonment up to 6 months. Regarding the control of election expenditure, campaign financing received very careful attention in the new House of Assembly bill in sections 54 to 74. I have read that this type of regulation is new, both in Dominica and throughout the Eastern Caribbean as a region. But I must also add that it is not new in the Commonwealth of Caribbean, as there is already a comprehensive regulatory framework in Jamaica, and the subject has been featured frequently on the agenda of the Association of Caribbean Election Organizations, consisting of some 22 countries and independent territories, which has been in existence since 1998. Now, I'm aware that Mr. Julien Johnson, is discussing this topic. And in the interest of time, I will refer only to Section 64 of the House of Assembly Elections Bill, which specifically limits expenditure on election expenses. It includes a provision for those limits to be varied by the Electoral Commission after consultation with the political parties and approval by resolution of Parliament. This is an appropriate and well-recognized constitutional process. The commentator who described the proposal on election expenditure as invoking a will and fancy of Parliament was doing no more than undermining confidence in the rule of law. Coming to the Electoral Commission, which is a crucial aspect of the new framework for election management, as the proposed Electoral Commission Bill of 2023. This entirely new piece of legislation aims to enhance the functionality and the supervisory authority of the Electoral Commission over vital aspects of the electoral process. But given the limited time of my presentation, I cannot delve into the specifics. The purpose of the bill is to facilitate a more effective operation of the Electoral Commission, established under Section 56 of the Constitution. And the bill is worth reading. It supports and expands the constitutional provisions, assigning functions to the Commission relating to the registration of electors and the conduct of elections. And it is an essential companion measure to the draft registration of electors bill and the draft House of Assembly elections. Among other things, the bill provides for the incorporation of the Electoral Commission, affirming its independence from any person or authority. It establishes financial provisions, including the creation of the Electoral Commission Fund, and it outlines the sources of money for the fund, and stipulates obligations for the Commission to prepare reports and undergo audits. A crucial aspect of the bill is the prescription of a code of conduct for commissioners and employees of the Commission. Media access is addressed in Section 50 of the House of Assembly Elections Bill, which mandates that political parties and independent candidates participating in an election shall have access to state-owned media during election campaign periods under the guiding principle of total impartiality. The Electoral Commission is required to monitor the equitable allocation of airtime during campaign periods, and it may issue directives. It is understood, and in my view, reasonably so, that access to private media is governed by business principles and rules of contract. Consequently, political parties and candidates who wish to utilize private media must pay commercial rates. There is no legislative need to regulate this. In conclusion, I'm optimistic that a constructive approach by all stakeholders should lead to the successful enactment of legislation and the beginning of the electoral reform and modernization process. I therefore again thank and recognize the efforts of the Dominica Business Forum. It is my hope that the proposed measures will contribute to a stronger and more robust electoral system in Dominica. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Dennis Byron. Thank you. At this stage, we will move into the presentation by Mr. Julien Johnson, which will be presented on his behalf by Ms. Valis Knight. Please welcome Ms. Knight to the podium. She said Ms. Valis Knight-Didier. My apologies. Thank you. You will do that.
Mr. Julien N. Johnson. My main focus of interest in the electoral reform, modernization process and debates is the financing of political parties, campaign financing, and the autonomous oversight jurisdiction of the Electoral Commission. In this context, I will examine the reports and the bill for the House of Assembly Elections Act 2023, particularly sections 4 and 7, and the bill for the Electoral Commission Act 2023 presented by Sir Dennis Byron. On the 12th of March 2021, as my contribution to the electoral reform consultation process, I submitted a paper to the Right Honourable Sir Dennis Byron on political party and election campaign finance. I give a snippet of the history of elections in Dominica from 1961 to 2019, and the financing of political parties and election campaigns during that period. My recommendations to Sir Dennis Byron address the following core issues. 1. Source and control of funding, spending limits and disclosure of monies received and spent by political parties in order to ensure lawfulness, transparency and fairness in the electoral system of Dominica. Prohibition of donations to political parties in cash and in kind by foreign states, foreign persons, and non-resident CBI citizens. And 3rd, some public funding and public in-kind contributions to political parties and candidates for election campaign. In this context, I noted that by decision of the Cabinet, a constituency assistance allowance of $2,000 per month to each of the 21 elected members of the House of Assembly was being paid since the 1st of July 2020. I therefore recommended that Parliament provides a subvention to include this allowance to be shared among parties with parliamentary presences and to assist with general elections campaign. I also recommended that during general election campaigns, the printing of manifestos of political parties and independent candidates be done by the government printery. 4. Private funding. Contributions in cash and in kind from citizens of Dominica are acceptable and encouraged, but that the upper limit and other terms and conditions should be determined after consultation with the political parties and other stakeholders. And examples for this can be found in the Antigua and Barbuda Representative of the People's Act 2003 and also in the Trinidad Representative of the People's Act 2015. 5. Independent oversight, administration and enforcement of legislation. I told Sir Dennis that for an oversight body to be endowed with the capability to perform its statutory functions with robust independence and impartiality, there must be careful selection of its members from professional and experienced persons of high public standing and reputation for integrity and who are not known to have strong and active political affiliations. And I drew to his attention that in 2008, the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition exercised good judgment in the appointment of members of the Integrity Commission under the Integrity in Public Office Act 2003. And he is showing no bias by himself being appointed to that commission. I stated in the paper that in the appointment of the Integrity Commission on the 2nd of September 2008, the appointing authorities, being the Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition, got it right. They brought together a team of persons of independent mind and means, covering a wide spectrum of talent and sustained experiences from long and distinguished service, including a Prince of the Church and prominent personalities from both the public and private sectors. 6. I also advised that it was necessary that proper accounts of all monies received by the political parties and candidates be kept, that audited accounts should be submitted to the Electoral Commission for examination, and that the Commission must be empowered to impose penalties for failure to comply with the statutory requirements. Section B. Other stakeholders in the reform project also recommended political finance regulation. These included the Organization of American States, the group comprising leaders of churches, business, and civil society of Dominica, 3. the Electoral Commission of Dominica, 4. the Dominica Business Forum, and 5. the Dominica United Workers' Party, among others. In this report, Part 1 of November 2020, in his report, Part 1 of November 2022, Sir Dennis Byron summarized 2 of the important challenges posed to the current electoral system that came out of the stakeholders' engagement, meetings, and submissions. Materially, he stated as follows. 1. Campaign financing reform. While there has been concern expressed on the matter of financing of political parties and campaigns, and the level of influence this may have on the electoral process, there are no regulations currently on the limits for campaign expenses or donations, whether in cash or in kind, or on the disclosure of sources of funding. And 2, autonomy of the electoral office. The electoral management organization should operate with a level of independence from the executive of government and should be equipped with the requisite human resources and capacity. This is in Sir Dennis's report. Additionally, the office should optimize technology to strengthen the transparency and accountability of the electoral process. In his Phase 2 report and draft legislation to implement electoral reform recommendations, that's in June of 2023, Sir Dennis Byron submitted inter alia the following draft legislation. 1. A bill for the House of Assembly Elections Act 2023, and 2. A bill for the Electoral Commission Act 2023, which is brand new. I will now focus briefly on these draft bills. 1. The bill for a House of Assembly Elections Act 2023, Part 5, which deals with political campaign financing, which is the focus of this paper. Sections 54 to 74 of the draft bill introduce provisions to regulate political party and campaign financing in Dominica for the first time in the island's history. Maximum for a political party or candidate. Section 64 deals with limits on campaign expenditure for a political party and suggested the figure of $5 million, or such sum as the Electoral Commission may specify, subject to parliamentary approval. And for an individual candidate, he suggested a maximum figure of $500,000 or such other sum as the Electoral Commission may specify, subject to parliamentary approval. Penal consequences may apply if expenses beyond these limits are incurred. Section 57 of the proposed bill prohibits the acceptance by political parties or candidates of contributions from an impermissible contributor within the meaning of those sections. This prohibition, that is the impermissible contributor, includes A, foreign or Commonwealth countries or any agent thereof, and B, an entity whose existence is or activities are illegal. C, a person or entity whose identity is not disclosed to the recipient of the contribution. And D, a person or an entity who makes the contribution through an intermediary or who uses a false identity in making the contribution. Section 55(1) deals with the limitation of contributions that any particular contributor may make in a reporting period to or for the benefit of a candidate or a political party. Section 56 obliges the political party or candidate to take all reasonable measures to verify or ascertain the identity of the contributor and whether the contributor is not an impermissible contributor. Section 65 places an obligation on political parties or candidates to obtain invoices where during the campaign period they are supplied with goods and services of a value exceeding $500 or such other sum as the Electoral Commission may specify by order subject to parliamentary approval. Mr. Johnson's comments on this. In considering the value suggested in Section 64 of the draft bill, it should be noted that the estimated cost of financing the UWP 2000 elections campaign was $3 million and $100,000 per candidate, and his source is from the estimated cost of political financing Dominica, compiled by Cecilia Bag from estimated cost shared by informants. 2. The DRP, the Dominica Labour Party, budget outline dated June 1st, 2018 for campaign 2018-2019 circulated on the internet was US $26.64 million for the 2019 general elections. And 3, he observes that the Dominica Chronicle in an article published on the 27th of November 2019 disclosed that the UWP obtained $6 million of foreign funds as campaign contributions in 2005. So Mr. Johnson's comment essentially is that the $5 million proposed seems fair in this time. E. Read the Bill for Electoral Commission Act 2023. This is new legislation. Section 4 provides that the objective of the Commission is to safeguard the democratic foundation of Dominica by organizing, directing, supervising, managing, and controlling the registration of elections, the conduct of elections, and the conduct of referendum in a free, fair, independent, transparent, and impartial manner. In construing this act, therefore, the courts must be guided by this provision. Section 3 of the first schedule seeks to circumscribe the discretionary appointment powers of the President, the Prime Minister, and the Leader of the Opposition by establishing broader criteria or qualifications that fall to be considered by them when appointing the 5 members of the Electoral Commission. These desirable features include that at least 2 members represent the interests of civil society, being persons drawn from academia, the private sector, or an organization representing religious bodies, and at least 1 member who is a female. Furthermore, a person is not qualified for appointment as a member of a commission or a committee if he or she is holding or has held at any time during 5 years immediately preceding the date of appointment office in a political party. Mr. Johnson comments, ideally, the Constitution should be amended to include these provisions in order to prevent further amendments thereto by Parliament by its ordinary legislative process, which may include the deletion of all the aforementioned provisions. But an amendment to Section 56 of the Constitution requires a referendum procedure, which historically has not produced expected outcomes in the Commonwealth Caribbean. the fundamental issue becomes blurred, and the process of referendum of the Constitution is more about the political parties stirring up their bases rather than what it truly is. Finally, on the Electoral Commission Fund, a charge on the Consolidated Fund and report to Parliament. The provisions in the draft legislation to strengthen the independence of the Commission in areas of finance administration I fully support. These provisions include the establishment of the Electoral Commission Fund to be used for the administrative expenses of the Commission and such other purposes necessary for the discharge of its functions, and which shall be a charge on the Consolidated Fund. This fund is to be administered by the Commission in accordance with the Finance Administration Act. The Commission is required to prepare an annual report to be tabled in the House of Assembly and may publish that report. Conclusion. Mr. Chairman, as I end this presentation, I am fully aware that what I am about to say is being addressed to a Parliament of Dominica whose oversight powers have been fractured by an over-mighty executive. This result was outrageously achieved during 2 decades of partial and partisan overlordship, which eroded the Westminster Conventions and codified rules enacted in the standing orders of the House of Assembly. Imputing proper motives, rulings, were dished out with mighty rage and fury as impunity and continuity were assured. I will repeat that. Imputing improper motives, rulings, were dished out with mighty rage and fury as impunity and continuity were assured. Written questions to ministers from elected members of the House of Assembly were severely amended, willy-nilly or disallowed. And so, Mr. Chairman, in these dark days and darker nights of Dominica's representative democracy requires a sovereign, charismatic champion. I turn to you, or to them, the 11th Parliament of Dominica under the Independence Constitution of 1978 with this earnest but emphatic appeal. I urge members of this Parliament to rise up to the highest height of statesmanship and to deliberate and deliver to the people of Dominica in their desperate hour of need the good practice electoral reform legislation. These modern draft bills have emerged from wide consultations and contributions from the many Dominican stakeholders who labored freely for this electoral reform project. These bills are informed by the Jamaica Representative of the People Act 2016 and other Commonwealth precedents of which I am familiar. Mr. Chairman, I am of the opinion that the provisions dealing with political finance regulation, that is general political party and election campaign finance, and the regime to strengthen the independence of the Electoral Commission meet, open quote, the international best practices on electoral reform, close quote, called for by even the Honorable Prime Minister of Dominica, Dr. Roosevelt Skerrit, on the 4th day of October 2020 on his annual program on the DBS radio and television. In my view, these draft bills substantially satisfy Dominica's treaty obligations under Article 7.3 of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, the Inter-American Democratic Charter adopted on the 11th of September 2001, and of the Commonwealth Anti-Corruption Benchmark 9 Political Regulation, published in April 2021 by the Secretariat and the leadership of the Right Honorable Baroness Patricia Scotland, KC, Secretary General of the Commonwealth of Nations. Mr. Chairman, there is much more to say, but I must go. My time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Didier. Thank you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, at this stage we will move into the presentation by Dr. Irvin Andre. Before I do so, let me apologize on behalf of the Attorney General and Mr. Duncan Stowe for not being able to make it. Yes. Without further ado, we shall move into Dr. Irvin Andre's presentation. Thank you, and give Dr. Andre a welcome, please. Thank you.
All right. Good morning to members of the business forum. Let me say greetings to the distinguished presenters, Sir Byron, the presentation of the former chairman of the IPO, Mr. Julien Johnson, eloquently read by Ms. Noelize Knight-Didier, those who were present but who were not, those who were present in this wonderful church. And let me thank Pastor Rodney. Just looking at the background of the podium, I feel blessed and I feel inspired that I should share my own thoughts, even if they may differ in some aspects significantly from what your audience has heard today. So again, as I said, we begin with special thanks, and we always recognize that irrespective of how dire the landscape appears to be, as referred to by Mr. Johnson in his presentation through this night, there is always room to be optimistic. There is always hope in the horizon. So let me do something a little differently. I wish to start by situating the need for electoral reform within the proper context of this discussion. Laws and the reform of laws impact communities. They affect citizens very profoundly. The reform of laws, it has a significance to Dominica because it will determine the type of country where they live. Do these reforms reinforce the basic tenets of democracy that we hold so dear? Or do they normalize and legitimize practices that undermine democracy and the right of voters ordinarily resident in Dominica to choose their government? Do they perpetuate patterns of inequality in the voting process, or do they help to create a level playing field? These are serious questions which we must answer. This question of reforming Dominica's laws is not an abstract or illegal question. It is a question which affects most profoundly the lives of Dominicans living on Dominica. Our historical experience of resistance during and after slavery requires it. The people's love for their country, longing for independence, and protection of our rights as rightful occupants of this sacred land are captured in our history of resistance, in our dance, and in our indigenous songs, one of which express our desire to pakite yokon Dominica Hadlum, to not allow them to take Dominica from us. Another states Dominic do Dominic Isiwo, and there's another song which says, in part, Bondye Banu Tutse Bagay Sala. But now, as some are besieged by the pain of poverty and the hounds of hunger, cries of I cannot eat concrete rend the air while the haunted lyrics, a man selling his nation by DominicaTradehouse.com warns of an ominous threat to our sovereignty as a nation. The framers of our Constitution recognize the role of an official opposition and the integrity of the electoral process as critical to protect our democracy. In drafting our Constitution, they did not advocate throwing hot water at persons who support any opposition party. They did not envision or contemplate a political leader publicly declaring that no law, no constitution can stop him from contesting an election, even if disqualified from doing so. Electoral reform is important because elections have consequences. They determine who is employed and who is not. They determine who gets state assistance and who do not. They determine who gets a chance to bid in government contracts and who do not. And members of the business forum, they also determine who gets prosecuted for incitement and who do not. They envision that our Constitution would be our supreme law, equally applicable to everyone. They sought to establish an independent electoral commission which would not simply kowtow to the interests of the incumbent. And so as we examine Sir Byron's proposed reforms, we are animated by our historical experiences, by the intentions of the framers of our Constitution, and by what Martin Luther King described as the fierce urgency of now. In my view, the lack of true electoral reform cannot be discussed without considering the to national crisis that has besieged Dominica on account of the recent actions of England and the 6 conditions of the United States, the EU, and the UK regarding our CBI or Serial Passport Program. This exercise, to repeat, is not an abstract or academic one. Electoral reform is critical to determine the state of government in this small and blessed country. With these opening remarks, allow me to focus on Sir Byron's reforms. Let me declare without hesitation that I believe that critical aspects of these reforms will perpetuate certain practices by the government that have run roughshod over free and fair elections in Dominica. I will tell you why I believe that collectively they pose a direct and existential threat to our fledgling democracy. Point number 1. We welcome the recommendation that economic citizens who have not resided in Dominica for a stated period prior to an election should not be afforded the right to vote. That said, the proposal that persons living abroad who visit Dominica for an aggregate of 90 days in 5 years should be eligible to vote in Dominica opens the door for serious voter fraud. It is inconsistent with existing legislation in Dominica. It was not a development envisioned or contemplated by the framers of the Constitution. The eligible voter, according to our existing legislation, is one who is at least 18 years old, who, subject to exceptions, has lived in a constituency for a fixed period prior to an election. That is similar to legislation in a number of islands, including Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and a few others. This proposal does not serve the cause of democracy, in my view. It only serves the interest of the incumbent. Indeed, in a draft proposal regarding voter eligibility in April of 2022, Sir Byron recognized this because there is absolutely no reference to a Dominican ordinary resident abroad becoming eligible to vote if they visit Dominica for an aggregate of 9 days in a 5-year period. Point number 2. Sir Byron has refused to specifically criminalize the paying of the airfare or seafare for voters with the implied or expressed intention to have them vote for a candidate or his or her party, despite acknowledging, as he said today, that Hillsbury laws of England made it or make it a criminal offense to do so. This odious practice has occurred over 3 electoral cycles in Dominica. It has skewed electoral outcomes in favor of the incumbent. In 2019, for example, there were 19 airplanes on the tarmac of the Douglas Charles Airport during the general election, and they were not there to admire the scenery, as beautiful as it may be, or to offer Dominicans a vet. The failure to erect or enact this legislative guardrail in the proposed electoral or in opposed legislation regarding voters will inure to the benefit of the party, which has engaged in this practice for the past 15 years. Point number 3. The proposed legislation includes a provision for national ID cards rather than voter ID cards. The former will more fully promote transparency and integrity in the election process than the latter. If the goal of these reforms is to promote and enhance integrity in the voting process, why the hesitance or reluctance to specify the need for voter ID cards, even if such a recommendation runs afoul of what the incumbent government desires? Point number 4. The designation or the requirement of persons for registration officers overseas, in my view, amounts to nothing more than a Trojan horse in which those who appoint these overseas officers will focus exclusively, just as they have been doing, on cherry-picking or registering their own foreign-based supporters to vote in Dominica's election. This is no exaggeration. It is what has been happening over the past 3 electoral cycles. Persons, selecting persons, and arranging for them to receive airfare to travel to Dominica for the sole purpose of voting has been the norm over the last 50 years. The reports rely on the integrity of the incumbent party to act impartially and with integrity. That assumption, in my view, is nothing more than wishful thinking or naivety. Point number 5, campaign financial reform. The mischief which this reform seeks to eliminate is the undemocratic scenario where one political party vastly outspends its competition, thereby giving it an unfair advantage in a general election. The prohibition against foreigners and foreign companies making donations to candidates or parties in a general election is a sound one. So too is the requirement for self-reporting regarding the receipt of any types of donations from persons either questionable or others. Indeed, we recall a few years ago, the senior counsel publicly stated that a foreigner in receipt of a Dominican diplomatic passport paid $400,000 for that gift, which was used to fund an election campaign. Let me once again repeat, the whole question of electoral reform is not some type of pie-in-the-sky discussion. It has consequences. The provisions regarding the reporting of such contributions is also a step in the right direction. But there are at least 3 problems with the proposed reforms, which severely limit any ability they may have to create a level playing field in the area of finance campaign reform. First, how is the legislation going to be policed? By the Electoral Commission, the same commission where 3 members out of 5, by virtue of their passport-selling proclivities, are beholden to the government. Second, Sir Byron proposes a spending limit of $5 million for each party during a reporting period, defined as that period following the announcement of an election until 6 months following the election. Again, I have no quarrel, with the recognition that in the interest of fairness, a maximum limit on electoral spending is required. I take no quarrel with that. However, there are 2 deficiencies that severely undermine any potential this reform may possess in introducing fairness in electoral spending. First, there is no limit in pre-reporting spending by an incumbent who spends hundreds of thousands of dollars on election paraphernalia before calling a snap election. Dominicans found that out. In the last December 2022 election, which Sabaroche report fails to mention, and which over 70% or approximately 70% of voters of Dominica boycotted. This failure to put electoral or elections, limits on election spending, pre-reporting spending, makes a mockery of the limits placed on such spending during a reporting period. Furthermore, there is a recommended spending limit of $5 million during the reporting period. Again, Sir Byron can be faulted for making some recommendation. He did indicate that the Electoral Commission, with some discussion or input from the opposing parties, and ultimately for Parliament, can alter that recommendation. But again, the question must be raised. Who constitutes the majority in the Commission will have total freedom, even with input from the 2 parties or the parties contesting the election, to increase these limits if it chooses. Who controls the voting majority in Parliament will have the last say in determining these spending limits. As a result, the limits of campaign spending in Sabaroche reforms amount to nothing more than sound and fury, signifying nothing. To be sure, Sir Byron has sought to reverse the power imbalance in the Commission by proposing the expansion of the Commission to include representatives from various sectors and at least 1 woman. Expanding the Commission obviously requires a constitutional amendment. But with the present configuration of Parliament, it is virtually impossible that the Political Directorate will voluntarily relinquish its stranglehold over the Commission. There are other reforms necessary to preserve Dominica's democracy that have not been mentioned by Sir Byron in his report. These include A, 2 consecutive term limits for Prime Minister. B. Fixed date for elections. C. Limiting the votes of Dominicans abroad to 2 virtual constituencies to ensure that they don't overwhelm the votes of Dominicans ordinarily resident in Dominica. D. Proposing conflict of interest measures to disqualify persons from becoming a member of the Commission if they have ties to the government, which would ensure that they would never exercise independent judgment in ensuring that the task or the functions of the Electoral Commission is prosecuted. E. Mandatory debates between the leaders of the competing political parties and between those contesting the elections. The F. Reforms involving the constitution of a hybrid model of first past the post and proportional representation to prevent the concentration of decision-making in the hands of a leader who regards the island as his personal plantation. The vast majority of the proposed reforms can be achieved through strategic amendments of Sir Byron's proposed legislation. But I am not holding my breath. After all, electoral reforms proposed by the OAS, the previous Secretariat, current Prime Minister, and civic organizations have been ignored and disregarded. In 2019, the OAS lamented that 50 recommendations for electoral reform it made since 2009 fell on deaf ears. The only reasonable conclusion to be drawn from this is that the current administration has no use for any reforms that creates a level playing field in elections in Dominica. Make no mistake, the enactment of the proposed legislation in its present form will constitute an abortion of our fledgling democracy and cement our degeneration or departure from the welcoming arms of democracy. That is the fate that is staring us in the face. We can reverse it if we try. We can stop the sale of passports if we want. I say so without fear of being stopped by any speaker of any house. It cannot be sanctioned by any sleight of hand or cynical attempt to stifle free expression in Dominica. It is known. This is the inconvenient truth that I wish to bring to your attention. And here is my summary of electoral reforms that are entirely consistent with the tenets of democracy in Dominica. To achieve the overarching goals of free and fair elections that would preserve our constitutional right to choose our government and, even more importantly, to preserve the rule of law in Dominica, I propose the following. 1. A Prime Minister shall serve no more than 2 consecutive terms in office. 2. The voters' list should be cleansed annually and not merely of deceased persons, but also of anyone who is not ordinarily a resident in Dominica. 3. The right to vote is limited to a citizen of Dominica of 18 years or older who is ordinarily resident in Dominica at the time of the calling of an election. For the purpose of this legislation, the definition of ordinarily resident is as follows. Ordinarily resident means a regular and habitual mode of life in Dominica, as opposed to a temporary sojourn, vacation, visit, or transitory presence. 5. There shall be no overseas registration of voters. 6. The Electoral Commission shall have the authority to remove from the voters list the names of all persons who are not residing in Dominica. 7. Dominicans who are ordinarily resident overseas, who are 18 years or older, can vote in 2 virtual constituencies to elect representatives who will represent the interests of Dominicans abroad. 8. On the day of the elections, it is an offense for an elections officer to view a voter's ballot before the voter places the ballot into a ballot box. 9. General elections shall be held on a fixed date every 5 years. 10. The Constitution should provide for a hybrid system of first past the post and one of proportional representation as a counterweight against the concentration of and abuse of power by a Prime Minister and his or her party. 11. There shall be fixed limits on campaign spending not merely during a reporting period, but also during the 6-month period preceding such a period. Spending in each constituency by a candidate or political party is limited to a sum in the vicinity perhaps of $50 per person living in that constituency. 12. The breach of any provision of the legislation governing elections in Dominica is punishable by a fine, custody, or in appropriate circumstances, disqualification from contesting future elections. 13. All eligible voters in Dominica shall be issued voter identification cards. 14. The voter identification card shall contain biometric data including fingerprints. 15. Voting in more than one constituency by a voter during an election shall be an offense punishable by a term of imprisonment. 16. The payment of air or sea travel for a person ordinarily resident abroad, with the express or implied intention of having that person vote for a candidate or his or her party, constitutes the offense of bribery, punishable by a fine, custody, a term of imprisonment, or where appropriate, disqualification from contesting a future election or elections. 17. The payment of persons by a candidate or political party to provide entertainment during an election with the express or implied intention of persuading voters to vote for the candidate or his or her party constitute the crime of treating, which is punishable by a fine, a term of imprisonment, or where appropriate, disqualification from contesting future elections. 18. A special prosecutor shall be appointed by an independent tribunal or body, rather than by the Attorney General, to prosecute any violations of the election legislation. 19. The Director of Public Prosecutions shall no longer have the authority to intervene in a prosecution involving the alleged violation of Dominica's election laws or to null or prosecute any such case before the courts. 20. All parties contesting a general election shall have equal access to both state and local radio stations, as is the case in Antigua, during the reporting period of an election. 21. The owner of a private radio station who is convicted of failing to comply with this legislation shall be punishable by a fine not exceeding $5,000 for each offense. 22. The composition of the Electoral Commission shall be expanded to include a minimum of 3 additional members or a maximum of 5 members. These additional members shall be nominated by civil society and appointed by the President of Dominica. 23. Any member of the Electoral Commission who works for or provides services to the government of Dominica for consideration other than being a member of the Commission shall be disqualified from serving as a member of the Commission. 24. A fixed amount of money shall annually be allocated to the Electoral Commission by the government of Dominica to enable it to exercise its duties and responsibilities. 25. The political leader of each political party contesting an election shall engage in at least 3 debates prior to the election. And finally, each candidate of the major political parties contesting a general election who is not a political leader must engage in at least 1 debate with other candidates in the constituency he or she is seeking to represent during the reporting period of the election. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a slate of reforms that I am proposing, one which is finely tuned to reflect the realities in terms of the way we've conducted elections over the past 3 elections cycles. We cannot adopt a slate of reforms based on the premise that one size fits all. We have to tailor those reforms to reflect the realities on the ground and to reflect the difficulties, the challenges that have been identified by so many reports from so many distinguished and impartial and independent organizations. That is where we are. That is what we must seek. And as I indicated, I have no illusions about whether these proposed reforms are accepted. Indeed, I venture to say that they will not. But that should not prevent us from advocating for them. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Herbert. Thank you. At this stage, I'd like to introduce Mr. Achille Joseph from the Dominica Employers Federation for his presentation. And then we will move into presentations by the political parties. Each will have, say, 7 minutes for their presentations. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Achille Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, at this point, I'm not making a presentation. I'm actually going to moderate a sort of an open session here where we will provide an opportunity for organizations who are present here to make a presentation. I am aware that Dr. Thomson Fontaine is here. We have on the program an allotted slot of about 10 minutes per presentation. But if I could get an idea as to how many people here want to make a presentation, I can probably extend the 10 minutes because we have about an hour and a half to do that. So just sort of raise your hand. I know Dr. Fontaine is here. You don't want me to give him the entire hour and a half. We have Tony's here, that's 2. Pastor Rodney, did I see your hand? Yeah, so that's 3. Number 4, I saw Dr. Sabaroche out there. I don't know if he wants to make a presentation. So that's 4, the 4 was 4, the 5. All right, so Team Unity present. The Dominica Freedom Party. Freedom Party will present online. Excellent. The United Workers Party is here. The Dominica Labour Party. Did your hand go for the Dominica Labour Party? Okay. All right. There is also the Alternative People Party. Am I correct? That's the name? Team Unity. Okay. So let's stick with the 10 minutes. Depending on how the presentation goes, I could probably extend a couple of minutes. Okay. So we'll begin with Dr. Thomson Fontaine. Dr. Fontaine, you may take the microphone at the podium. And following Dr. Fontaine, we will just flow into the other presentations. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me say a very good day to everyone, and it's my pleasure.
1 second, Doctor. Vehicle number. Someone has their hazard lights on. It's PZ542. I think you want a battery for you to get home. PZ542. Sorry, Dr. Fontaine, you may proceed. Thank you.
All right, let me say a very good morning to all of you who are here with us this morning. It is my pleasure to be part of this forum, understanding that the reforms that we seek should serve to cure any and all irregularities in our current voting system. And my thanks, of course, to the presenters who went before, Byron, Noelize, Knight-Didier on behalf of Mr. Julien Johnson and Dr. Andre. Let me say that I am heartened by the approach of the Business Forum this morning to treat this matter of electoral reform as one of national importance and not simply the purview of opposition parties. Indeed, all of Dominica will lose if we fail to get this right, and similarly, the entire country stands to benefit when we get this right. It is important to echo the sentiments of the CCJ, which warned against allowing taints of past elections, particularly of 2019, to color future elections in Dominica. The only way these taints can be erased is with precise and enforceable legislation, which will once and for all preserve our democratic traditions in Dominica. In the view of the United Workers Party, there are a few critical provisions of Sir Byron's final report that, if left unchanged, would allow for the conduct of elections in the same manner and under the same conditions which have plunged our country into a crisis situation. The list I'm going to read is not exhaustive. There are lots of other areas, but I'm going to focus on a few key and critical areas as follows. The overseas registration of voters, the provision of national ID cards rather than voter ID cards, and no specific indication of the biometric information that is required. A confused definition of residency, which allows Dominicans residing abroad to vote in Dominica if they visit the island for a total of 90 days over a 5-year period. Limited access to state media by opposition parties, an insufficient definition of bribery with no specific indication that paying for the air and sea passage of persons who come to Dominica to vote for a candidate or political party constitutes the offense of bribery, and no meaningful campaign finance legislation such as specific limitations on electoral expenditures. We are of the firmly held view that allowing the electoral reform legislation to move ahead without a review and correction of these provisions cited above is a recipe for disaster that may well plunge this country into political and social unrest. And I do not say this lightly. Consequently, the United Workers' Party proposes the following amendments to the legislation. Number 1, on overseas registration of voters. The current legislation, which is outlined in Annex 7 of the report, Part 4, Section 52, now reads as follows, quote, in order to facilitate the confirmation of registration of persons to whom this part applies and who are overseas during the confirmation period, the Commission may A, by order published in the Gazette on the website of the Electoral Office, and in such other manner and in such locations as the Commission's thinks fit, designate suitable places in such countries as the Commission may determine as enrollment centers for the purpose of this part. And B, having regard to Section 55, prescribe such provisions as may be necessary to facilitate the confirmation of registration of such persons, including the procedures to be followed. Now, here's my observation on this. Section 52 appears to be in contradiction to Section 50, subsection 4, which reads, quote, the confirmation of registration shall be carried out by means of the technology-enabled voter registration system referred to in the notice published under Section 33(1)B, if the activities and procedures related thereto are specified in such notice. Also, in its current form, Section 50 forces the Electoral Commission to determine which overseas voters are more important than the other voter. Because they will have to decide, for example, that those living in New York are more important than those residing in Alaska, or those residing in Taiwan, or in Juba, South Sudan. This is very important. In recommendations on this particular section, we should rephrase it to read, persons residing overseas who wishes to confirm their registration will be required to do so in person at the polling district where they are registered or at the electoral office in Hurtault. And then we should delete sections A and B, or alternatively avail the same confirmation of registration as in section 54. So that's our concrete recommendation for that particular one. Number 2, on the provision of national ID cards. Again, in Annex 7, Part 3, number 11, or section 11, now reads, and I'll quote, where a person has been duly registered as an elector, the Chief Registration Officer shall cause a national identification card in the prescribed form and containing the prescribed information to be issued to the person in accordance with the regulations. The Chief Registration Officer may designate locations for the purpose of the issue of national identification cards. there shall be established and maintained by the Chief Registering Officer a roll of the names of persons to whom national identification cards have been issued. Our recommendation is quite simple. Replace national identification card with a voter identification card. This will also mean the rewriting of Annex 6, Section 13 to 16 to reflect voter ID cards rather than national ID cards. And in addition, the biometric information must be contained on those cards to include that of fingerprints. Number 3, on the definition of residency, Part 3 of the Annex 7, Section 26 now reads, and I quote, a person whose name is in the register of electors and who lives outside Dominica shall not be regarded as having been absent from Dominica for the purpose of Section 12b if in the 5-year period immediately preceding the date of the last publication of the register of electors, the person visited and remained in Dominica for a period of at least 90 days of a period amounting in the aggregate to at least 90 days. Recommendation. A person whose name is in the register of electors and who lives outside Dominica shall not be regarded as having been absent from Dominica for the purpose of Section 12b or 13b if in the 5-year period immediately preceding the date of the last publication of the register of electors, the person visited and remained in Dominica for a period of at least 90 days. In other words, we're saying that this should be removed. It is not fair to say if you come over a whole 5-year span for 90 days at different times that you maintain your residency criteria. This is at odds with the current legislation and therefore it should be removed. On access to state media, Annex 1, Section 50 states, and I quote again, subject to subsection 2, a political party and any independent candidate participating in an election shall have access to state-owned media services during the campaign period. Number 2, the Commission shall, and I won't read everything here. Number 3, every state-owned print or electronic media that publishes any information relating, and I will stop there on that. And number 4, for purpose of giving effect to this section, the Commission may, in writing, issue directives to the media. So that's what is contained in legislation. Here are our recommendations on this. Subsection 1 must include the word equal before access. In other words, not just a matter of giving access or granting access, but there should be, during an election period, there should be equal access to all political parties and independent candidates to state media. Beyond the monitoring given effect to the Electoral Commission, they should be able to impose penalties on the radio station if ignored. Okay, that's very important, not just to monitor whether or not they are adhering to it, but where is the enforcement? That needs to be strengthened. And therefore, subsection 4 should be extended to the issuing of penalties if directives from the Electoral Commission are ignored or not observed by the state-owned radio station. On campaign finance reform, all I can say I concur with the views of Mr. Julien Johnson. I will not repeat what he said, but there must be strict limits placed on spending by political parties, and we have recommended in the past a per candidate or per constituency kind of fee. In Barbados, it's $10. In Dominica, it will be $20 or $30. But it has to be limited in the extent of to what each party can spend. Before closing, let me just look at some of the areas which are very minor, not minor, but not as detailed as I want to, as we did before. And I call this miscellaneous areas. One of them have to do with Section 28, Section 20, Subsection 1. We said that before deleting the name of any person from the register of electors or any list in the chief registering officer, that's before deleting the name, right? A, except where an elector makes a request under Section 25, shall cause the prescribed notice to be sent to the elector at his or her address, last notifying the chief registering officer, and shall act in accordance with the prescribed provisions. So they are recommending that the Electoral Office send out notices to the 45, 50,000 persons, many of them dead, many of whom are not in Dominica. That we believe would be excessive. It would be an onerous task on the part of the Electoral Commission, and really there is no need for this. This, in my mind, is an exercise in futility, which serves no useful purpose, since the honor should be on electors, and that they should be duly registered. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, let me remind the government of Dominica that it must do what is right by the people of Dominica. Similar electoral reform measures have been conducted in several Caribbean countries, which are so much as a whisper of dissent. Why is it different in Dominica? Why are we going through this torturous approach where people are calling for demonstrations, people are calling for agitation, we're having those types of forums? Why? What is so difficult, Mr. Prime Minister, about doing the right thing by the people of this country? We must work as Dominicans to preserve a democratic tradition that can endure through the ages, and which above all will lead to free, fair, and credible elections. I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Fontaine. Thank you for your presentation, and you kept within the time frame. We have with us Mr. Bernard Ito of the Dominica Freedom Party. He's online, and he is ready to present. So, Mr. Ito, thank you for accepting the invitation to present, and you can go right ahead.
All right, thank you so much, and let me say good morning, pleasant morning on the island to everyone that's here in this beautiful building, and everyone online and everyone radio listening. We all know this is a very important aspect of our democracy and a very important mission that we're on to get electoral reform passed and improved in Dominica. The DFP firmly believes that successful reform can only be achieved by adhering to certain guiding principles when analyzing this legislation. Therefore, the DFP is analyzing the proposed legislation through the lens of the following principles. 1. The proposed legislation strengthens our institutions of democracy. The proposed legislation effectively safeguards against cheating and bribery. The proposed legislation creates a correct and transparent list of electors. The proposed legislation establishes campaign finance rules that allow for fairer, transparent, and more competitive elections. Fixes to the proposed legislation should be developed in the spirit of bipartisanship and a nation-first approach. 6. Fixes to the proposed legislation should be pragmatic in its approach. Fixes, number 7, to the proposed legislation should be oriented towards creative solution finding. So utilizing these 7 principles, the following are some specific positions of the DFP on the elements of free and fair elections that are required to preserve Dominica's democracy. First position. The DFP's position is to advocate for the inclusion of fixed dates for general elections in the Dominica Constitution. However, the DFP considers this to be a long-term goal and believes it should not prevent us from implementing immediate electoral legislation to enhance democracy in Dominica. The DFP's position is to consider and evaluate the merits of a limited form of proportional representation as an alternative to the first-past-the-post system. But however, once again, the DFP views this as a longer-term goal that should not hinder the current adoption of electoral legislation that aims to enhance democracy in our island. The DFP's position is that it is crucial to evaluate both the current constituency boundaries and the number of constituencies to ensure voting parity. The DFP's position is that the Prime Minister should serve only a limited number of consecutive terms in office. However, it is important to note that this view is considered a longer-term goal and it does not necessarily contradict the current adoption of electoral legislation aimed at enhancing democracy in Dominica. The DFP's position is to support the belief that a complete re-registration of voters would be desirable and the most straightforward method to establish an accurate register of electors. However, the party also believes that with the right approach, the existing list can be effectively rehabilitated to achieve the same desired outcome. The DFP's position is to strongly advocate for embracing modern technology in the registration, voting, and maintenance of electoral systems. By incorporating cutting-edge technology, the party aims to enhance the efficiency, accuracy, and accessibility of the electoral process. Embracing modern tools can lead to a more inclusive and transparent system, ultimately strengthening democracy and citizen engagement in the electoral process. The DFP's position is to also advocate for the principle of freedom of access to electoral register data. The party insists that the legislation should include provisions to facilitate easy access to digital data of all registers, lists, and other election data as permitted under the legislation. The goal is to ensure transparency and accessibility in the electoral process. Another position of the DFP is to acknowledge the modern reality of a small microstate, that there are in fact more Dominican citizens residing outside the island than on the island, allowing therefore unrestricted voting by non-resident Dominicans could lead to a situation where they have the potential to influence the government's formation without having to directly face the consequences of their choices. The DFP views this as a moral hazard. Therefore, the party advocates for designing an electoral system that grants resident Dominicans a decisive role in the governance of the island, as it believes this approach is only fair and appropriate. However, the DFP's position is also that Dominica should be a seamless global nation. The patriotism, contributions, and networking of our diaspora population is critical to national development. We therefore believe we should discuss the long-term establishment of external constituencies so that Dominicans in the diaspora who meet certain established criteria before shall be able to do so in one of these constituencies. To appeal to these voters, political parties will be motivated to establish policies and practices that are specific to diaspora needs and concerns for effective living and participation in the economic and social life of Ghana. This approach will also be a significant advance in eliminating the problem of treating and bribing in the form of transportation to Dominica during election. It's a win-win for everybody. The DFP's position is also that explicitly defining the term absence from Dominica in the legislation, specifically using the criteria of 90 days cumulative absence over a period of 5 years, represents an enhancement of the existing open-ended definition. The party does not endorse any reduction of the cumulative date withdrawal on extension of the 5-year period. The DFP's position is that the validation of the absence requirement is crucial for the effectiveness of the proposed legislation. We emphasize that the methods and processes of validation must be thoroughly and explicitly outlined in the legislation to ensure transparency and clarity. The DFP's position is that the term National Identification Card be sensibly replaced with Voter ID Card to accurately reflect its purpose and scope. The DFP does not see the basis for the designation of the voter ID card as a national ID card in the legislation. Furthermore, the party simply does not comprehend why the Electoral Commission should oversee national ID cards. The DFP's position is that a voter ID card should be issued to all eligible voters in Dominica, which should include biometric data such as fingerprint. But in addition, each card should at the minimum contain a unique voter ID number, a photograph, the polling district, and the voters' address. These things must be explicitly called out in the legislation. The DFP's position is not to support overseas registration of voters. The DFP's position is that all political parties should have equal access to state media in Dominica during an election period. Additionally, the party believes that the ideal situation is for private media to also provide equal access to all political parties. The DFP's position is that there should be the implementation of fixed limits on campaign financing expenditure. The DFP's position is that contributions from foreign individuals and organizations should be explicitly prohibited. The DFP's additional position is that the definition of bribery in the relevant election legislation should explicitly encompass the act of paying for air or sea travel for individuals with the sole intention of having them vote for a candidate political party during the election. We must have that definition in the legislation. The DFP's position is that the fines imposed for campaign finance offenses are unreasonably low and will not serve as effective deterrents. $10,000 means nothing to millions of dollars. We advocate for stronger measures against violations of electoral laws, including campaign finance offenses. We propose that breaching these laws should result not only in fines or imprisonment, but also in disqualification or other punitive electoral actions for any candidate, whether directly or through the agent, who is found guilty of such violations in the DFP's position is that the legislation should incorporate disqualification criteria for the president's selection of a chairperson of the Electoral Commission. Included in such criteria should be that individuals with evident conflicts of interest, such as economic or other benefits linked to a specific party remaining in power, ought to be disqualified from assuming such a role. The position of the DFP is that not just the chairman, but any commission member should have the authority to request access to all records of individuals as permitted by the legislation on the records list. In summary, my friends, the DFP firmly believes in utilizing the existing work to enhance electoral legislation rather than rejecting it outright. Our focus is not on criticism, but on finding creative solutions to enact effective electoral laws. We acknowledge and declare that achieving this goal will require dedicated effort from all of us. In addition to participating in public forums such as this, we must invest countless hours behind the scenes to thoroughly analyze the legislation and propose viable legislation. While we may not match the current administration's financial resources, we are confident in our ability to outwork and outthink them. The DFP is committed to this path and we will continue to do so unwaveringly. Thank you so much. The work continues. This is not the end. This is not even the beginning of the end, but it's a beginning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ito. I will just inform that someone from Team Unity is here. Mr. Carlos Charles. Thank you for being here, sir.
Good morning to everyone, both here and those listening and viewing online. Good greetings to the head table. Thank you for allowing us to present. The former president, the deceased Dr. Nicholas Liverpool, reminds us that the right to vote, and as a consequence, the right to determine which political party or group of persons is to govern the country during the next parliamentary term is one of the most important rights of a democratic society. The significance of the vote is what brought us here today. And for the avoidance of doubt, Team Unity supports the recommendations that political parties have presented. Our position is that this activity is held behind what should have already been done. This should have been done before the presentation of the draft legislation, meaning Dr. So Byron should have been advocating for those kind of activities. All political parties, interest groups, and persons with interest in the election process should have been brought together, and all the recommendations be taken on board in his presentation of the draft report. Voting also comes with a citizenship requirement, but there's also must be a residency qualification. So with that in mind, I keep in mind the persons who would have purchased our passports or become economic citizens. They should be persons who are actively resident in the country. This has been a dispute for over a decade and a half, and it's becoming even more and more of a vexing issue. Reform, it's, as I said before, a vexing and partisan issue, and it should be seen as a most significant exercise in the life of democracy. The regular reform of the voting processes must be continuous in order to maintain the integrity of the vote. In the last general election, I saw persons' names who I am pretty sure the people in charge knew that they do not live anymore. However, they are still on the list. Persons who have lived out of Dominica for over 5 years and never even came back for a Creole festival, their names are still on the list. We did the reverse in Dominica. Politicians are now being asked to comment on a legal draft which was submitted in favor of one man, the Honorable Prime Minister. All parties should have participated freely, and this was not done. So I would like to encourage Sir Byron to take on board the recommendations that are being recommended out of this and other forums which will take place. The worrying feelings that about this report and the spirit in which it was done is that everything is going to be done in a, as I mentioned, in a haphazard manner. One person is going to say what he wants, and the ISO simply have it. The Dominican vote was not necessarily fair. The Electoral Observer Mission of the OAS and the Commonwealth of Dominica in the December 6 general election of 2019, this was their comments. Sorry, thank you very much. The reforms are both political and legal, but the political must take first before the legal. And I don't see any lawyers having any forums of this topic, which is an important issue in the life of Dominica. The lawyers, the legal association should have come together and make a presentation to Mr. Byron. That should have been something that is taken on board before the presentation of the draft legislation. Today you have invited politicians to discuss a legal draft, and it's really a symbolic consultative exercise. It's, as I've mentioned, it's a Duvalier kind of thing. You come now, we now have to do a consultation on something which was already presented to us. As a matter of fact, it wouldn't surprise me if it's already being prepared to be presented in the House of Assembly. So again, let me just reemphasize, Sir Byron, your duties, you have gotten paid by Dominica's money, our money, all of us, including those who are in the leading of the country. Your duties should have been to get everybody together. Let us all our ideas content. I don't see hear these things over and over again. The presentation as presented by Dr. Fontaine and the leader of the Freedom Party. All those things have been said and echoed and re-echoed and regurgitated over and over again. Yet, when we received this draft, none of these presentations, which are generally in the public, none of them have been taken on board. A simple thing as a re-registration, a complete re-registration of the list. What is so hard in that the Electoral Commission, it is their duty. We pay them to represent Dominica. They shouldn't have an issue in that. That should have been a major part of the draft legislation. This bill should be redesigned so as to reflect the wishes of the UWP, the DFP, TUD, the Dominica Labour Party, and others. So with these few words, I thank you.
Thank you, my good friend Carlos. Excellent presentation. And I think we seem to be getting quite a bit of agreement here on the direction that this process should go. It is lacking in many areas, and it must be more reflective of the views and desires of the country. Pastor Rodney, are you prepared? Okay, we invite Pastor Rodney to the microphone as he presents to us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And,
Pastor Rodney, before you go, just clear with us, who are you representing? If it's the, you'll tell us.
I will. I was about to say so that I did the welcome address as the pastor of this assembly to welcome this function here. And I am still very happy to have you. But I am here now presenting as the president of the Dominica Association of Evangelical Churches. So that's why I'm here. In fact, they sent me. Is that all right, sir? Can I continue? Okay, good. The Dominica Association of Evangelical Churches is mindful that the issue of electoral reform in Dominica has been an unnecessarily long process, and hopes that this initiative becomes the last in putting together a position which will be taken to Parliament on behalf of the people and will represent the tenets of free and fair election on the basis of a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Government was instituted by God as his servant for civil control of law and order. Romans chapter 13 and verses 1 through 5 makes government officials God's instruments to accomplish his purposes for good civil control. In any functioning democracy, the authority of the government can only derive from the will of the people. The will of the people. Can I say that one more time? The will of the people, as expressed in genuine, free and fair elections held at regular intervals on the basis of universal, equal, and secret suffrage. We are grateful that the executive branch of government has recognized that the electoral process needs revamping and has engaged Sir Dennis Byron in the process. It is important, however, to note that our understanding of current legislation as well as the operation of natural law does not make any political party the authority for reforming an electoral process that it is a player in. In short, you can't be the umpire of the game that you are a competitor in. Let me state here that the Dominica Association of Evangelical Churches have been involved in the whole process of electoral reform for a number of years now. And may I be bold enough to add that the Committee of Church and Civil Society for about 7 or 8 months prepared and presented a report that if you have not seen, you need to look at. We worked tirelessly to provide what we referred to then as solving the impasse of electoral reform in Dominica. It seems as though we don't cherish our own. Just my thought. The Dennis Byron report, in our view, must be edited, enhanced in some areas to ensure the following. Number one, registration of electors. Eligible electors must be those ordinarily resident in Dominica and by virtue of that residency contributes to the daily socio-economic fabric of their community. We do not believe that those who have sworn allegiance to another country and who are ordinarily resident there in that other country should be part of the elective process in this Commonwealth. We subscribe to Jesus' advice in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 24. No man can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Individuals who are overseas for purpose of service or education or view are temporarily resident outside and must ensure as their responsibility that they are on the voters list. Interestingly, ladies and gentlemen, caution must be taken to ensure that those 42,000+ citizens who became citizens via the CBI process should not be eligible as electors. Unless, of course, these individuals takes up permanent residence in Dominica and become ordinarily resident. We hold the view that Sir Dennis Byron's exclusion of 90 days over 5 years really and truly does not constitute ordinary residence. It means that an individual can come to Dominica for 2 weeks every year and then decide to vote. That is not acceptable. Number two, national voters card. Note we said national voters card and not multi-purpose cards. Every eligible elector must be issued a voter's card for the purpose of voting primarily. This card can be used as a government-issued ID when conducting other business. This card must have all the necessary biometrics and be so numbered so as to ensure that the holder of the card is the same individual so registered. 3. The term of the election cycle, we recommend a fixed date for elections to avoid, underscore the next phrase, to avoid prime ministers from the manipulation of the system and the waste of government resources for personal or party gain. 4. Campaign finance reform. And that might be a departure from what most have agreed on and spoken about. But you will understand, I hope, our posture on that one. Over the last 15 years, we've seen an increasing spend for election campaigns far in excess of the living conditions of the citizens being canvassed for votes. 2019, we understand that one party budgeted 20-something million. US, that is. Unless this spending is capped, we may see the leading of government by people outside of government who will be funding their personal nefarious interests at the detriment of the wider population. As an example, ladies and gentlemen, a few years ago while serving with another organization, the committee, the Interdenominational Committee Against Crime and Violence, we were informed that the value of drugs going through the region to the US was annually in excess of what, 400 million US dollars, Mr. George? Just imagine some of that funding a political party. Just imagine. We propose, therefore, campaign spending of not more, please take a note, of not more than 5% of the total annual minimum wage on the total population divided by the number of constituencies. Your campaign finance must represent the people whom you're asking for their votes. You can't be spending monies at election time that the people are not even close to making. Campaign financing must be tied to the living standard of the people we propose to represent. Number 5, the Constitution of the Electoral Commission. The Commission in its current form cannot be considered fair and independent. With repetition, the Commission in its current form cannot be considered fair and independent. Although there are 2 members nominated by the incumbent and opposition, the chairperson is indirectly an appointee of the incumbent. And that always tilts the Commission on the side of the incumbent who appoints the president. Eyes will always have it, whether it's for the appointment of the president or for the constitution of the Commission in its current form. We propose that an independent electoral commission should comprise of the following: 1 member nominated by political parties. And for that, we have questions that I won't answer because we have been thinking of political parties that are political parties, not political parties that are names of political parties. May the Lord give you wisdom and you understand what to say. It should comprise of 1 member nominated by the following representative groups. Each, the DAEC, and those are possible organizations, the DAEC, the DBF, the DAEC/DCC, Dominica Christian Council, the Dominica Bar Association. And then the president to appoint the chairperson in his or her deliberate judgment. Outside of the report, and give me that latitude please, that's a document that we submitted as well as the DAEC to Sir Dennis Byron, as the DAEC. In July 2022, the Dominica Association of Evangelical Churches wrote to both parties in Parliament at the time to ask that consideration be given to changing the law on the ability of ministers of religion participating in elective or representative politics. Currently, the law says that if you're a minister of religion, you cannot contest elections or even be nominated as a senator in Parliament.
Sorry, Pastor Rodney, 2 minutes.
I have 2 minutes?
Yes.
Mr. Speaker?
I would like to move a motion that Pastor Rodney be allowed to say what
I just need 3 minutes. I'll be finishing in a while. In July 2022, like I said, we wrote that letter. We do not know we don't know the reason why the Constitution under Chapter 32 equates a minister of religion with an insane person, a bankrupt person, an imprisoned person under the sentence of death, or one who by virtue of his own act under an acknowledgement or allegiance, obedience or adherence to a foreign power state, and disqualifies them from such an important function. We don't know how a minister of religion is the same as those kind of people. What makes this more interesting is that a minister of religion is defined in the Constitution as a person in holy orders, and any other person who performs the function of whose principal occupation include teaching or preaching in a congregation for religious worship. Some of you might know people who contested elections who did that. We again make this plea for an immediate change to this unfair disqualifying vice. Since we all agree, and I'm closing, Mr. Speaker, since we all agree that this electoral process requires urgent change, we must work to ensure that every individual has the right to express their political opinions without interference, that every individual can seek and receive and impart information and make an informed choice, that every candidate for election and every political party shall have an equal opportunity of access to the media, particularly the mass media communications, in order to put forward their political views. We are also mindful of the provisions of the law against treating bribery, personation, and undue influence, and we pay particular attention that the definition of undue influence includes inflicting spiritual injury. That's in the Constitution. Laws govern every civilized country. When the law is watered down or ignored, chaos is inevitable. The Church encourages all to enact just laws and to follow the law of the land to ensure continued stability and peace. The DAEC encourages all parties to approach this important subject matter with soberness of mind and purity of heart to ensure that decisions are well informed. We encourage the media, especially on the social platform, to be responsible in their discourse and be civil to each other on the matter of electoral reform. And finally, I say, on behalf of the DAEC, we all have a responsibility to ensure that our democracy remains stable and vibrant for us and for future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I know we would have wanted to hear more of Pastor Rodney's presentation, but we have certain timelines that we have to stick with. We will now invite to the podium Mr. Anthony Leblanc. And Tony wears several hats, so Tony must be here as he will tell us which one of them or some of those that he will speak on behalf of. Tony, the microphone is yours.
Yes, good morning. I think protocol has been established. Chairman, my head is bare. I don't see any hat on my head right now. So, at this point, my heart is definitely a member of the Business Forum, and definitely a citizen and a businessman, an engineer, a contractor. So pick whichever one you want, but at the end of the day, a citizen who wants to see good governance, the machinery to allow good governance to exist. So, I want this morning to look at mainly Mr. Byron's first phase report, because we need to see the thinking behind the legislation. And I'm not going to dive into the legislation just now. I'm going to look at the first phase report. There are two areas that I have looked at. And one is the general comments and ideas. I did a presentation on that a couple weeks ago. I won't go into that unless Mr. Joseph gives me more time. So I would rather go, some of the general comments are very relevant, but in the interest of time, I'm going to skip that, and I'm going to go to the second part. So I'm not going to deal with IDs. I probably can give some summations if he gives me more time, but I'm going to go to the residency requirement. It's a very interesting area that we need to look at, and I'm dealing with it from the perspective of Byron's first phase report. So I'm going to deal with the three first areas. I'm not going to deal with confirmation and diaspora at this point because time wouldn't permit me. So let's look at what Byron says on residency qualification. On page 19 of 46 and page 28 of 46, it says, the legislation defines the qualifications relating to residence or domicile. A person is qualified to register to vote in a polling district if that person is a citizen of the Commonwealth of Dominica, a citizen of the Commonwealth who has been resident for 12 months immediately before the date of registration, has a minimum of 18 years and has resided in the polling district for 3 months. So let's look at that. The residency in the polling district is the only safeguard that the resident citizenry have to determine how the place that they live works, how it's governed, and how it's developed for their continued enjoyment. This saves us, those who are resident, from the dictates of droves of persons who we sell our citizenship to, from the dictates of those who come here on holiday but don't reside here. So I want to focus on that, the privilege of the residents. Residency is in the polling district, mark you, is the only safeguard that residents have to determine the place where they live, how it's governed and developed, and how they can continue to enjoy it. And this small safeguard is what we have. I think it might be better that I look from here. I read from here. Alright, so let's go. So Byron on residency of voters, he says on page 16 of 46, the current electoral system does not provide mechanism to verify residency. Feedback from the Commission is that the legislation does not include any definition of residency, and consequently, this impedes the authenticity and credibility of the current electoral system. And that's on page 16 of 46. But Byron, the Commission always had the power to make regulations for the efficient management of the electoral process. Did he fail to see that? I'm not sure. And let's see how Byron deals with these glaring shortcomings. Definition of residency. He spoke about that. And means to verify residency. So we know to register to vote that, according to Byron, on page 16 of 46, the person would come to the assistant registering officer's home, present an ID and a witness to verify that they are resident. I don't know that the current ID is required in the legislation to register to vote. Probably it is. And these days, the bank asks you to bring in a bill, right? A utility bill to say that you reside at 14 Great Marlborough Street. But the banks go a little further. If you're not the one whose name is on the telephone bill or water bill, they say you have to provide a letter from the person whose name is on the telephone bill to say that you're residing with me. And today, to register to vote, I only need to bring John Matthew to say I'm residing there with no proof. And we haven't changed that, and we don't seek to change that. We're not even asking for a justice of the peace to come and say, yes, he lives in the community and he lives at 14 Great Marlborough Street. But he said we need an ID. I don't know. That's what he said. I haven't seen it. And let's see what it says on residence versus absence, because I think that's the crux of the matter. It says Parliament, it means the existing Act, have defined residence in relation to citizens of the Commonwealth of Dominica by prescribing that absence from Dominica for a period exceeding 5 years was the basis for deleting an elector's name from the registry. And it says the issue of allowing voting rights to persons who have been residing overseas, mark the word, who have been residing overseas, who are not resident in Dominica, have been and remains an issue of passionate contention. So Byron knows it is an error in the existing Act to confuse residence with absence. Let's go back to a few slides earlier. We said that he said there's an issue with the definition of residence. But he's not dealing with it, he's dealing with absence. Residency standards are recognized globally. When you say residence, the dictionary tells you it's the fact of living in a place. It's a fact that I live here, I am resident. It's not a fact that I'm absent from here, it's a fact that I'm living here, that's residence. If I'm resident, I live here. I am not a resident if I come here on holidays. So there are lived residency standards. If you have a US green card, you apply to be a resident and you got that application approved. The US expects you to be resident. So we know a lot of people who try to circumvent that and go to the US every 6 months. And every now and then, the border control calls them back and say, hey, you make up your mind. You're either resident or you're not resident. Pack up, leave Dominica and come to the US. How many of our brothers and sisters did that? A lot. Alright? In Dominica, if you have to go to one of the sites to see the waterfall or whatever, the park warden asks you, have you been in Dominica for the last 6 months? It is a standard of residence that we have accepted. Our very Registration of Electors Act requires that you have to be resident for 3 months before you can register to vote. So we have standards. So we cannot go back to absence. So let us recall that Sir Byron was hired to give legal clarity, not to confuse the matter. Residency ought to be defined in the draft bill, not absenteeism. Residency ought to be defined appropriately. We vote in polling districts. So, at a minimum, residency should tie in for persons living in a polling district continuously for 3 months, sometime before an election. If you're required to be there 3 months before you register, you should have a certain amount of time to be resident there before an election, before you vote. Whether it's 3 months in a year, whether it's 3 months in whatever, but you should have some residency, not absenteeism. So, was that employed to confuse the matter? Absenteeism rather than residence. So let's see what Sir Byron says in his report. He says, and I'm reading from page 13, paragraph 13 on page 29 of 46. Eventually, after various compromises, the following provisions was reached. Electors residing outside the Commonwealth of Dominica would be considered absent from the Commonwealth of Dominica if in any 5-year cycle they spent an aggregate of 90 days in the Commonwealth of Dominica. 90 days over 5 years works out approximately 18 days per year. Information on vacation entitlements in the USA suggests that 18 days exceed average vacation entitlement, which were more in the vicinity of 10 to 15 days per year. This led to the alternative position of 50 days per 5 years. He didn't have 5 years, but I'm adding 5 years because I think that's what it was meant. The Commission accepted the principle, but did not agree on the time that should be spent in the Commonwealth of Dominica to avoid removal from the Register of Electors. So paragraph 13, page 29 of 46. So Byron is proposing a draft registration of electors bill to allow persons who are normally resident in another country to vote in that country which they spend as little as 10 days of their holidays per year. Is Sir Byron echoing that phrase that Dominica is not a country? And is he knowingly or not, is he hired to be an instrument of destruction of that Dominica is not a country? And what is also amazing is that the Electoral Commission did not even agree that less than 10 days per year spent in Dominica was sufficient to consider you absent. Let's go back to that. That's specific, and I'm going back to Sir Byron's report, that same paragraph 14, page 29. I'm reading the last part, which says, however, the specific recommendation that was made was to extend the period of absence, which would disqualify a person from being on the Register of Electors to 10 years. So now we move from 5 to 10 years.
I told you 2 minutes, start counting down.
I don't usually count down because I usually ascend, but I'll try.
Ascend from 0 to 120 seconds. Then.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, you're taking so out the 2 minutes. So we are risking the definition of residency as living in a polling district for a non-continuous period of 9 days in any given year over a 10-year period. That's the risk we're running. Defining residency for voting as living in a polling district for a non-continuous period of 9 days in any given year on a 10-year period. It may not be in a draft bill, but it may be amended in Parliament. Let's be real. But we're also looking at a backdoor CBI residency qualification. We just need to require that CBI applicants remain in Dominica for 9 days and they are entitled to vote. So is it a sinister plan that we have? So Byron says on page, and that same paragraph 13, remember 13, paragraph, page 29, 36, go and read it yourself. He said, but in the absence of such guidance, and he's referring to that there's no guidance on the definition of absence. In the absence of such guidance, clarity on the meaning of absence in the context could be provided by the courts. Such should the matter be adjudicated by the courts. Wow. So Byron has been given the role to clarify things. He's saying, I'm not doing it, I'm leaving it for the courts to do. Court guidance as opposed to getting it done right now. So Byron was hired to give clarity. Our courts are a time-consuming process, we know that. It's expensive, and it lends itself to lengthy controversy. Just look at the history of what transpired in the election petitions. And that's another matter that we have to deal with. I don't think I'm satisfied with how it was handled. We have made proposal as the electoral reform group before on that, and I think we'll get back to that. But I want it to be a wake-up call for us. That we are at the risk of defining residency qualifications to vote as living in a polling district for a non-continuous period of 9 days in any given year over a 10-year period. And we have most probably created a backdoor CBI residency qualification with that. And we just need to require that a CBI citizen is no one applicant, remain in Dominica for 9 days at a hotel or an Airbnb, not a house, at a hotel or Airbnb, and will be entitled to vote. And it's an aggregate period of 9 days that we may be looking at, my brothers and sisters, in a year. So you can come for World Music Festival, you can come for Carnival, you can come for something else, and whoa, you qualify to vote. I want us to look at the last part of that slide. How many people currently hold Dominica citizenship by investment? I am told that the updated figure are about 42,000 persons. And I saw a blog recently that recommended that they reduce the price for our passport, for purchase of our passport, no matter what a certain parliamentarian said last week. Or this week, was it?
The speaker.
Oh, the speaker. Okay. We sell it. We sell it. We sell our privilege. And 42,000 persons eligible to get through the back door to meet that residency qualification contends with what we believe in 2019 was most likely the real number of registered voters, 55,000 or thereabout. So where are we? 42,000 CBI eligible voters to 55,000 registered and possible verified voters.
Thank you, Mr. Leblanc.
You're quite right, Mr. Chairman. That's what I will deal with the next time I come around.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So I hope I did justice to the area.
Well, definitely. I think there is an option that you could pass on the remainder of the entire presentation to the DBF as we sort of put a composite at the end. So somewhere along the line you will be informed. As the governor of the DBF, for sure, you will have that privilege of sending in your presentation so we can put a composite together as we sum up in the future to pass it on to the appropriate authorities. There was a hand somewhere in the corner down there. The glaze in my eyes, so I can't see your face too clear, so come on, please. No, I've not forgotten it. Go right ahead. Oh, Darius! Oh, sorry, man. You see where I'm sitting there, there's so much strong light coming from there. Darius Lequent. So, you tell us who you're representing, most likely yourself, but...
No, I think I'm representing the Sunfly.
The microphone is yours.
And that is the Constitution. I appreciate everything that has been said here. The Constitution is the only power in this room that runs things. I'm Dr. Darius Lequent. I was born on this street. No, I was born in Prince House. I live on this street. No, I live on Independence Avenue, or whatever they call it. The reason why I'm speaking is because there are a couple of things. Section 117 of the Constitution says that it is the supreme law, and anything that violates the Constitution is void. Let's understand what void means. Void means it's a vacuum, and in a vacuum, that can be filled by anything. You have no control over what fills the vacuum. So you can do whatever you want. You can violate the Constitution all you want. It is true that no law or Constitution can prevent you from doing something. But the Constitution says, no matter what you do, it is void. Now that's important to understand because Mr. Byron should have known a few things which he didn't follow through. And I think everyone in this room needs to understand this because we seem in Dominica to have gotten to the point where we treat our Constitution with disrespect. As someone told me this morning, we are indisciplined. The Prime Minister is the head of government. Sorry, the head of the cabinet. There's really no head of government in Dominica because there are three parties to government. Government is the judicial, executive, and legislative. There's no head of that. So the president is really the head of state. Mr. Byron was appointed as the president's agent. The prime minister's agent, sorry, because he was appointed by him. You know, I checked that with the chief election officer last week. I told him, you do understand that the prime minister cannot consult with the Electoral Commission because it's independent. He can't speak to it. All he can do is appoint someone to it, but he can't consult with it. That's the law. The chief election officer agreed with that. And so therefore, Mr. Byron became the agent of the Prime Minister. Under rules of agency, he can act on behalf of the Prime Minister. But Mr. Byron cannot speak to the Electoral Commission because he is representing the Prime Minister. So the moment Mr. Byron called the Electoral Commission, he should have known, and the Electoral Commission President should have known also that they couldn't speak. That communication was unconstitutional. Now, from listening to what's going on, I think people have the impression that this discussion is going to lead to legislation that will then be handed to Parliament. That cannot happen. No legislation from this consultation can go to Parliament. Because even though Mr. Byron consulted with the Commission unconstitutionally, the Constitution still provides that before any act can be brought to Parliament, it must be presented to the Commission. That hasn't been done yet. Let me illustrate what I mean by that. We have a principle called judicial review in law, under which a court can rule that an act of Parliament is unconstitutional. You cannot get around that by consulting with the court and asking. You can't get around judicial review by the legislature calling up the Chief Justice and saying, help us prepare this act so that when we pass it, it will be constitutional. No. Under law, what you do is you pass your act, and then the court rules whether it is constitutional. So therefore, Mr. Byron could not consult with the Commission and say, talk with me first, so that when I finish this act, and it is, well, either may or may not be presented to you, it will be in accordance with your wishes. That is not what our Constitution requires. Our Constitution says that before any act is presented to Parliament, it must be given to the Commission so it can do its independent review. So this consultation that Mr. Byron had with the Commission is unconstitutional. And by that act, it is void. Now understand what void means again. You can do it. Nothing is, I think Dr. Thomson made a remark on the radio regarding a car going down the road that someone is driving and is passed out. Yes, the car is going down the road, but anything can happen. You have no control what's happening over it. So you can do whatever you want. You can have your consultations. You can bring it to Parliament. But bear in mind that the Constitution runs things. I'm speaking on the Constitution we have, the sunfly in the room. And warning that what has been done so far is unconstitutional. Whether you accept it or not is up to you. And I appreciate what has been done, and I have my own personal views on certain recommendations that were made. Personally, I think people can pass whatever laws they want. The only requirement for a law is that it must be in accordance with the Constitution. And what we are doing now with Mr. Byron, that has been broken. And for the benefit of Dominica, and let me hasten to say this here, because people think I talk too much about the Constitution. I got into it because I did law in the US, and I'm discovering some things which are intriguing. The Constitution is what runs things, and it's not like a law. You see, the difference between a law and a Constitution, let me just give a brief remark. Many people study law, not because they want to practice law, but because they want to know how far they can go in violating the law. There are people who do that deliberately, so that I see how far to the edge I can go without getting caught. What can I get away with? That's how we deal with a law. A constitution is different. In a constitution, you stay as far from the edge as possible, because you do your very best to follow it. That's why the president takes an oath to follow the Constitution. That's why leaders of government take an oath to follow the Constitution, because you are supposed to go as far away from violating the Constitution as you can. Right now in Dominica, we do what we want to see what we can get away with. That is not being constitutional. And the result of that is that we do things which create a void and can be disastrous. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak, but I want us to understand that our Constitution is the only thing that runs things, and we may do what we want, but it may come back to bite us.
Thank you. Thank you. Very short. Dr. Darius Lequent. Do we have any other presentation? Danny Lugay? Yes, and then we'll take one at the back. Danny Lugay will give you your brief comment. We'll give you 3 minutes for that. All right, thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I think some of what that Byron is not capturing is the anger of the people. 15 plus years we've been asking for electoral reform. You got an engagement from Prime Minister Stewart illegally, as I agree with Dr. Lequent. And yet, Prime Minister Stewart disrespected you by having the first draft in his hand and calling another election. And yet the people who are really behind the move for electoral reform, you rejecting or ignoring their call for voter ID cards, cleansing of the list, overseas voting, you just brushing over it. I would like to say to Sir Byron, sir, you are a scholar, but what you have done is not justice to Dominica. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Danny. Dr. Sabaroche?
Thank you. Good day, everyone. Protocol has been established, and I didn't prepare any speech, but based on what has been happening,
I have two observations in the process of taking that process forward. I'm happy that Dr. Lequent made reference to the Constitution, because what is the process? And the Commission, number one thing, from all the information, and solid information is the base for decisions. Valid and credible information is the base for decisions. Now, the decision has been established, and I think you will agree with me, that the Commission has to take the process forward. And you need legislation and regulations. And who is to advise the Commission to develop that level of legislation and regulations to take the process forward? That's my first point. My second point is, if we are to look around here and we are to say, what is the age of the people around here? This means that in taking the process forward, it should not rest with that, only with that age. This means that we need a level of education, not only for those who can vote, but the potential thousands of younger generation that we need to educate. Because if we are to demonstrate in front of Parliament and we have only we of that age group, we are not going to succeed. We need the younger generation, well educated and informed, to become part of the whole process for the legislation and the regulations to go to the Commission. Thank you very much for that opportunity.
Thank you, Sabaroche. We have one, just come up front quickly. I think this is the final one. Yes, just come to the microphone, make your presentation brief.
Good day to everybody. Oliver Walsh, boots on the ground. And I'm here to give my contribution. It will be very short. As we all sitting in here is aware that at this point in time, the Constitution in America has been challenged. And it's been challenged by a past president. And today, by 4 o'clock, this president will be going to court for violating the Constitution. I would like our people in Dominica, like the last caller says, the last speaker says, to get our young people on board and educated so that they can understand the value of the Constitution and the rights that they have to stand. Because presently, our young people are very scared and they're very sold out and doesn't want to show up. But believe me, our young people is a ticking time bomb out there. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh.
Years ago, I took a flight and I came to Dominica and voted for Roosevelt Skerry. My name is Peter Lugay. So for the second time, I would like to apologize to Dominicans for putting that burden on them. However, since I voted you, Mr. Roosevelt Skerry, I'm going to appeal to you today to do the right thing. I want to make an analogy of sports. Most of us that in here play sports. If you play a game, Goodwill against Roseau, and you felt the referee didn't do a fair job, The next game you're going to say, change the referee. You don't want that referee. We're going to ask for Potter's Hillman to referee the game. We want an independent person, which is what Skerry claimed that he did when he employed Byron. Mr. Byron, we are disappointed with you. But you, Mr. Skerry, I'm advising you and I'm asking you, if you say you can win the fight, give us a clear, even playing field. And let's go at it. We put our gloves on and we go at it. No, we are asking to give us voter ID cards. That is simple. Let's just do that. We are asking you to give us voter ID cards. We're asking for cleansing of the list. Let's cleanse the list. I don't want nobody voting on my name while I'm not there. If I say I'm Peter Lugay, I had an experience. When I came back here, my passport had to be renewed. Somebody sent me some cash Western Union. I went to pick up the money. I couldn't use my green card. I couldn't use my driver's license. I had to wait until I get my Dominican passport to get the money from Western Union. So when I'm going to vote, if I say I'm Peter Lugay, let me prove that I'm Peter Lugay. That's all we're asking. Let's clean the process. Clean up the process and let's go at it. And that's it. That's all we're asking. I don't think that's too hard to do.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. All right, I think we've come to the end of the presentations. We are making a summation. We are recording, so all those presentations will be captured in the end. Let me just say here that this activity is being hosted by the Dominica Business Forum, and there's a reason why we are doing so. I think there is another consultation taking place right now, or there probably should have been, that is being spearheaded by the government. And we do not know what is the status of that consultation, and persons who attended were invited. This version that we are doing here is to give almost everybody an opportunity to ensure that their voice and their contributions are heard and be factored into whatever end product that the state is currently engaged in. The role of the business forum here has to be understood. You see, in this country, whenever people are, one of the doctrines of the private sector is that when people are pissed off in this country, they exhale on the private sector. And this is something that has been proven over and over and over again. And the direction we see the process taken, and just as Peter said, the direction the process taken, we can see at the end there's going to be a lot of people who are dissatisfied and may resort to violence, and they're going to exhale on the private sector. Your businesses are going to be looted, your glass windows are going to be broken, people are going to enter. This is why the business forum cannot just sit there and allow this thing to go forward. We have to create an opportunity, a vent for civil society to be able to speak, and we make effective recommendations. And therefore, this is why we engage the police and the state after the hurricane. We had several meetings with the police brass. Following an incident in February, I think, what year was that? 2017. And we saw what happened in Roseville. We made several efforts. We met with the United Workers' Party, and we attempted to bring the United Workers' Party together with the DLP to see if we could get some peace and have this matter resolved. We were not pretty successful. We extended the group to add some non-state actors into it. So the Business Forum sees its role as going beyond just representing the private sector in their pursuit to improve the environment to do business. But when we see threats that may impact the private sector, we also see ourselves having a role to play. And in this regard, we hosted this forum. Having said that, I think I have ended my stint here. I can now pass the microphone back over to the chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chancellor. At this stage, we invite a DDF member. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, Mr. or rather Dr. Eisenhower Douglas, would you please come forward? Dr. Douglas and Mr. Nicholas George will do the summary of the decisions made and the way forward towards securing the new draft electoral and campaign finance laws and regulations. Dr. Douglas is also a governor of the Dominica Business Forum. Thank you.
A very pleasant good afternoon.
Yes, sir.
First of all, let me say that part of the, as Mr. Achille Joseph mentioned, the Dominica Business Forum has a very unique role to play in trying to reach consensus and therefore avoid what happened after Hurricane Maria on the private sector. I believe, although it looks like a long time and people may have forgotten, but remember that spate of looting that came right after the Hurricane Maria passed, and a lot of implications for private sector firms, and so we want to avoid that or minimize that happening. And that's just one possibility, only God knows the future. So I think so far we've proceeded very well. No very civil discussion. The politicians spoke, the private sector spoke. I remember Rodney, when he spoke, he quoted the Bible or certainly spiritual documentation. But I recall it linked me very well with the Declaration of Independence in the United States, Thomas Jefferson, 1776. So this was a high-level session. And when I recall what we wanted to do, documentation which prevailed was released prior to this meeting. We wanted to do an overview of the draft legislation presented by Severin. But first of all, we had a number of questions. To refresh ourselves. We started the meeting with Severina's presentation. Then we went to Noelize Knight, who was speaking on behalf of Julien Johnson. Then of course we have Irvin and who is a judge in Canada. We then went to Thomson, Fontaine, with UWP leader. Hurtault then spoke next from the DFP leader. Then Carlos Charles. Team unity. I want to say here that some of the consultations we have in now, these took place, there was a significant amount of consultation before the report was written. Some people elected not to participate, but Mr. Severin McKenzie, I give him a lot of credit. We actually met with President Byron in this very room. Over a year and a half ago, when the task was in very much infancy. So this is just a continuation. And we want to stay on course, like I said earlier, to bring this into a consensus position. And which, when we talk about consensus, we're really talking about a sustainable program for the next generation of Dominican, what this generation will leave behind, so it will be sustainable. Then of course, after Carlos Charles, we had Rodney, I spoke about him a while ago, Anthony Leblanc, always unique, multi-talented young man, makes some unique points. The whole business of the residency issue is a major issue. Whether resident Dominicans abroad versus the ordinary resident in Dominica, and that whole criteria I would like to say this is an area we'll have to try to get consensus, because listening to the media, some DLP people and UWP people seem to have strong views on this, you know, and there's justification on either side when you think about it. But it's something that hopefully we will find a way to reach common ground on. If we continue, if this session here today is an example of how these things is expected to continue to evolve. Then of course, Dr. Lequent, valid point, Dr. Lequent, but at the end of the day, you have to find a way to get the academic principles to jive with the practical realities on the ground. So I think it's good to be aware of the academic principles, but if you stay in them when you're in the practical reality, you wouldn't get something that is workable on the ground. So we have to find a mix of the two. Like you, I spent a lot of years in academia, but I also spent a lot of years on the practical realities and observe politicians. And politics really, the definition is the art of the possible. You know, you have to be able to compromise. You're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. But if you don't find common ground, you will remain in your ivory tower. So I have to be careful about it. And of course, Lugay 1, Lugay 2, and Sabaroche. First I'm seeing you, Mr. Sabaroche, from your days in the house. I know that you've done some academic work, and it's good to hear from you, because I know your heart in Dominica from my previous knowledge of you. So what I'm saying is that there's a lot of progress when you keep this thing civil, because at the end of the day, for example, in the budget debate, I heard the Prime Minister myself saying that he's willing to compromise on the, you know what I'm saying, although originally he said national ID, but he himself said in his presentation that, you know, he's not cast in stone, and that is really politician. At the end of the day, you have to have a mechanism for identifying the voter, and if you want to call it voter ID, there's just terminology, you know, so that's what I'm saying. So what I'm saying, to conclude, from the material which was circulated, there's supposed to be an appointment of a working committee to revise draft legislation. We overviewed the draft legislation today from our various perspectives. We identified flaws in the legislation. We made recommendations for proposed changes. We proposed amendments. So that's what we did. And as McKenzie rightfully said, our focus was more on the legislative issues, regulatory issues, as opposed to the report itself, although they are very closely related. So what I'm saying now, what I know we have to do is form a committee that will take the process forward. And I'm hoping that will be guided by the general approach that this meeting has been adopted. I also want to say in closing that from the information which came out from the government, the consultation supposed to be starting, the national consultation with Dr. Darius supposed to be starting from tomorrow, August 14th, for the next 10 days. And therefore, at some point, this exercise will interface with it. So now that we've started ahead of them, I don't think we should allow ourselves to lose any momentum, you know, and momentum in a physics sense. So we started rolling, we have the right attitude, let us keep it going so that we can reach a common ground. And I'm tempted to believe that the country will benefit. And I think if I identify one person, I don't want to make anybody feel embarrassed, but I really had it in Mr. McKenzie in the background. He and of course the President Darius, they have a good partnership relationship. Like me, he's like one of the foot soldiers. And I have no problem doing that, because at the end of the day, our vision is the same, and we want a similar outcome for the dog. None of us are planning to go on and live in Miami to green card and all that. Even if all of us have had green card in the past, I mean, Darius just came from the United States. I mean, I lived in the US for about 13 years, went to university, got my master's degree and so on, and worked there and so on. So, I mean, many of us, you know, so at the end of the day, because our home is there, our family, our children will be there, and therefore at the end of the day, if you are successful here, the country will benefit. And I want to say finally, that there are a lot of other important things taking place in Dominica. This is an important one, but there are other things like the whole battle against climate change, the question of geothermal energy, these are important areas. So we don't want to lose track of that. I mean, we are on a steady wicket, so let's forward on. But at the end of the day, it's just one of a series of other matters that the country has to succeed on, otherwise crack will smoke our pipe ultimately. And that I know is not our objective. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know that I can do justice to do a summary here after the eminent Dr. Douglas has presented. So what I'm trying to do here is, from what I listen, and what I glean, we don't seem to want to amend all the bits of legislation that Sir Dennis Byron presented. But there are some significant areas that we have significant difficulty with him on. And in my summary, I read it off as this: the registration of electors. Registration of electors and re-registration. There is, I think Dr. Thomson spoke on sections 50, 51, 52, and 54 of the Act, the bill. The area of real controversy is the confirmation of voters, electors overseas. And that is a serious area of contention, and that has to be addressed. And I think I got from these presentations that should be done. Any confirmation, reconfirmation, first communion, whatever it is that has to be done, re-registration for baptism, whatever, must be done in Dominica. I got that very clear. The voter ID cards, and we heard Dr. Douglas speak about the Prime Minister's pronouncement. I think I will address that at the end. I will not be very long. It is voter ID card, elector's ID card. And even Sir Dennis Byron mentioned that there's a possibility that the Commission would be acting illegally against the Constitution if they were to issue a national ID card. And like Dr. Douglas said, what another speaker spoke, just clarify the thing. That's all that you're required to do. Just clarify it. I think it was Mr. Anthony who said that. The issue of residency. Simple. I was a voter in Roseau Central. I contested the election in Collier, so I had to transfer my vote. But before I could transfer my vote, I had to be living in Collier, where I was born, for a given period of time. Then come to the registering officer in Roseau for a laissez-passer that I brought to Collier, and then I was registered to vote in Collier. Simple, we are accustomed to that. So if you are overseas and you are on the electors list and there has to be reconfirmation, let us have it done in Dominica. Fixed date for election that has been almost agreed upon. And again, I will come to that. 2 terms for any Prime Minister. Absence from the state. And we heard the pronouncements on that, as opposed to residency. And Mr. Anthony Leblanc spoke on that very, very clearly. The composition of the commission, and lawyers should engage as a grouping in the electoral reform process. And that's a point that has to be embraced by the lawyers. Because after the Constitution, the electoral process is the one that begins to give lawyers employment. That is to say, if you have a government control that is illegal, so probably that is why the laws may be staying away. No, we want it clarified up front, and you will still get work. Then, there is the issue now of trust. The word trust wasn't mentioned here, but if we listen to Dr. Irvin very clearly, we would have sensed that he spoke about trust. And part of the problem that we have here is the issue of trust. We cannot trust the Electoral Commission, point one. We cannot trust the Honorable Prime Minister. And so Dennis Byron should have reflected on that, because whilst he was doing his consultancy on the 6th of November 2022, the Prime Minister called a sham election, having appointed him to consult on a reform process. So that trust issue is great. And so Dr. Thomson Fontaine raised a point, I think one of the last speakers mentioned, the call for civility, that if we do not heed, might lead us to anarchy in our country. And that point has to be borne throughout the consultative process until we get into Parliament. Reverend Pastor Rodney mentioned the recognition that has to be given to ministers of religion to contest election. And he gave his arguments for that. And a recommendation. Administrative and or legal actions are absent, generally absent in the legislation proposed by Sir Dennis Byron. And that you will see in some of the legislation, they have the offenses. But the offenses are really people who interface with the commission, and not the commission. So as a candidate in 2019, I took lists of people who were overseas and people who were dead from our electors list in Colio to the commission. And the names are still there as of 2023. And I never got anything from the commission that they had sat on that. Nothing whatsoever. So that's an act of irresponsibility and unaccountability that should find itself in the legislation. That if the commission, the commissioners, and the staff, the chief elections officer and their staff, violate these things, then they should be held administratively or legally responsible and are sanctioned. They should suffer sanctions. And another thing is the Public Accounts Committee. I had mentioned that at a previous consultation with Sir Dennis Byron. And then he questioned me why I wanted this. You can have the best election with the best laws, but the corruption really continues in the cabinet of ministers and in Parliament. So we just had the approval of the budgetary estimates. And prior to that, we heard pronouncements that monies were allocated in the previous budget and it wasn't spent. Yet supplementary estimates were brought in April. So that is to say, the corruption does not end on polling day, 5 o'clock on polling day. it finds itself within the cabinet and in the House of Assembly. And the paragraph that treats with the public account system, the oversight body in Parliament, needs to be expanded into a Public Accounts Act, as has been done in Barbados. If we don't do this, and we get the best legislation, then we have a problem. And we need to build a confidence-building measure in the current legislation. We sat there and we saw Sir Dennis Byron being embarrassed. We heard the exchanges. He had written on the 6th of November to everybody. And the Prime Minister said he didn't get it before the 13th. And then he sent a rude letter to the gentleman. So Sir Dennis Byron knew then that the Prime Minister couldn't be trusted. And therefore, anything that is in any legislation that the Commission must do on their own deliberate judgment, in the body of legislation, there should be recommendation for independent oversight body. So that is to say, somebody comes to register and their registration is not accepted. It goes through the Chief Elections Officer and it goes through the Commission, and as if it stops there in the legislation, it will go all the way to the CCJ. If the Commission and its staff are corrupt in their ways, or are, as they are now, unaccountable, the passage of the best legislation can be defeated by their actions. And these are some of the things that I captured directly and indirectly coming out from this consultation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nicholas and Mr. Nicholas George. At this stage, we'd like to invite Mr. Severin McKenzie, a member of the Dominica Business Forum, Manufacturers Association, to deliver the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Members of the Dominica Business Forum, Mr. Paris, Mr. Bob, Mr. Joseph, Anthony Leblanc, Dr. Douglas, Dr. Thomson Fontaine from the United Workers' Party, and other members of the United Workers' Party, members of the Dominican Freedom Party, and all other persons who have graced us with their presence here and online, on Facebook, or following the Dominica Business Forum page. Let me express our sincere thanks to you for being here today, and we are hoping that this is the beginning of the conversation around electoral reform. And I think we have moved away from electoral reform right now to changing the electoral laws. Because, ladies and gentlemen, electoral reform really, when I did the last check on Wikipedia, is nothing more than just changing the existing legislation, and it can either be for better or for worse, or it can remain the same, and in this case we had no reform. And it would be, and I think it is very important that people understand that with all the fight that we have been fighting in Dominica, I think that some people in the rest of the Caribbean are wondering what is happening on this little rock, that people cannot understand that electoral reform is just changing the legislation to make it better for us and meet our basic desires. However, we also recognize that some people would not like to change the legislation for the better, they would like to change it for the worse. And this is where we clash, that we have to remain focused. But we who are advocating for better legislation should be mindful of the fact that we must know what we want.
And this is why this consultation today is important. And this is why I believe that I'm kind of concerned that people who are in fact advocating for electoral legislation for years now found it necessary to call for a boycott of this consultation today and made themselves obviously absent. So I would like to call on all those who have been advocating for electoral reform that we are very close. We are closer today now than ever before, because we have a draft legislation prepared by Byron, and it is our duty to influence the changes that are necessary to make the legislation better, to fit what we are asking for. It's simple. And as of today, so today's consultation basically was to do, one, get an idea as to what is in the legislation that Byron is proposing, what we have in our present legislation that we do not like and needs fixing, and come up with the recommendations for making the legislation better. And we were strategic and we were deliberate from the Dominica Business Forum point of view to hold this consultation today in advance of the government holding the whole consultation, because the government has everything in place to hold the consultation and to determine the results that they want from the consultation. So I am hoping that from this consultation and the recommendations that are coming out today, we will take it to the government's consultation whenever they decide to hold it. And I am calling on all those who are looking for, advocating for electoral reform. Please keep your eyes tuned and your ears in place, waiting for the date, the time, and the place of the government's consultation, and attend in numbers so that you can tell them what you want. So let me take the opportunity to thank Sir Dennis Byron for giving us an overview of the work that he has done. Thank Dr. Irvin Andre for his presentation today. Dr. Thomson Fontaine, Bernard Ito, and all those others who presented. Dr. Darius Lequent, I must comment on your contribution and tell you that your contribution is noted and appreciated. But there is something that we call reality. The reality of Dominica today is the Constitution is under pressure. And we can actually decide that everything that is happening is unconstitutional, and we do not do anything about it and wait for us to put the Constitution right, while those who violate the Constitution are given the go-ahead to get what they want with 19-2 in Parliament. So, it is important that we understand the process. Well, our responsibilities, the authorities have 19-2 in Parliament. I'm not too sure if it is not 19, if it is not 20-1. Making some observations over the last few days. 20-1, it looks like 20-1, more like 19-1 for me. And so we have to understand the realities. The citizens who are perceived to be opposition. Now, I would like to make it abundantly clear. I am neither opposition, I am not government. I'm just one of the free citizens who have the right to speak my mind and to do so independently without being aligned to any political party. And I believe that it is from this point of view that the Dominica Business Forum stands, while all other civil society, many other civil society and private sector organizations have been silenced. The Dominica Business Forum has taken up the courage to address an issue of that importance and significance to the country, and we will continue. So we're just going to ask you that we are citizens of Dominica first, and the struggle for electoral reform and changing the electoral legislation for the better of this country is for our own good as citizens and for the generations to come, because the future generations will not have anything good to say about us if some of us did not stand and try to save our democracy, where we can again have free and fair elections. So thanks again everybody for coming. There is one thing that I would just like to bring to our attention that nobody have addressed. I'm not sure if it is a constitutional matter, but I take it very seriously that the day I vote for a parliamentarian and put him in parliament, and he crosses the floor and disrespects me, I may have to take things in my own hand. So I believe that in the whole struggle for electoral reform, this idea of people campaigning and fooling people to vote for them for one party and then on their own jumping to the other side and becoming worse than what they were ever before. This is something that we should consider in the electoral reform process. But for me personally, with all the things that are going on in Dominica right now, at my age, doesn't really matter. But if I actually go and I vote for somebody and put my cross there, and then the following day or year, so this person moves my vote to what I did not subscribe to, I have a problem with it. So, ladies and gentlemen, on this note, let me say thank you very much for being here with us today, and keep the struggle going. Let us bring the information out. One of the things that we had is we decided that we would get, one of the outcomes we're hoping to get from this consultation is the establishment of a working group to compile all the recommendations that are coming from the consultation. So, from this, I would maybe just like to take the opportunity to above and recommend that we ask for volunteers, for example. I know that Mrs. Knight-Didier is not here representing the Bar Association, but she is in fact the president of the Bar Association. So we should be writing to the Bar Association to get a panel of lawyers to assist us. We would also ask the Dominica Labour Party, yes, the Dominica Freedom Party, the United Workers Party, Team Unity, and other organizations to present a person who can sit on this sort of committee to review the legislation and to do what is necessary. Because in the end, with all the questions about the Constitution and violation and whether Byron should have done this and that, the reality of the situation is we have a draft legislation to look at, and we should try to influence it as much as possible and present it to the Electoral Commission so that it can be forwarded with our recommendations for the better of Dominica's democracy. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Severin. we may all get back to our working days, our productive day. Have a blessed day, everyone. Thank you.
Higher by